Chapter 6, Section 1 in the 7th grade textbook is entitled Percents. So we've transitioned from fractions to things that kind of behave like fractions, ratios. But now we're going to talk about percents. Why? Well, look at what a percent is by definition. A percent is a ratio of a number to 100. Or in other words, a comparison of a number to 100. So we've been talking about fractions. We've been talking about ratios. This is just another type of fraction or another type of ratio, really. And so this is just the logical next step down that path we've been traveling way back now since Chapter 3, back in the first grading period. So again, a percent is a ratio of a number to 100. That's almost a literal translation. The word per in the word percent, no surprises to what that would mean. Per actually means per. And then you've got cent. Think of the word century there if you're looking for some root help. Well, you know a century is 100 years, right? So cent is part of century, meaning 100. So the word percent literally means per 100. All right, and that's very close to what the definition is there. It's a ratio of a number to 100. Think about your miles per hour. When I say miles per hour is a fraction with miles in the top and hours in the bottom. So when I say percent per 100, that would be a fraction with the per, and then since the 100 comes after it, the 100 would actually be in the bottom of the fraction, which is exactly what we have here. What they're going to spend a lot of time talking about in this section is the notes you see there at the bottom of the screen, the transitions between fractions and decimals and percents and fractions and percents, and heading in all the different directions there. So as you can see at the bottom there, there's a summary of the different transitions that we can make in these sections here in Chapter 6. So to go from a fraction to a decimal, you're going to divide the numerator by the denominator. The top number in the fraction divided by the bottom number in the fraction. Probably going to do that on a calculator. Fraction divided out will give you the decimal. Once you get it to a decimal, if you then want to take it to a percent, all right, you're going to move the decimal 2 places to the right and add the percent sign. And of course, chaining those together is how you go from fraction to percent. To go from a percent to a decimal, you're going to do the opposite of what we just did up there. You're going to move the decimal 2 to the left and remove the percent sign. And to go from a decimal to a fraction, you're going to identify the place value of the last digit. After the decimal, remember, it starts off at tenths and then goes hundredths, then thousands, then 10,000s, then 100,000s, then millions, then 10 millions, and 100 millions, and so on down the list. But you're going to identify the place value of that last digit. That's what you're going to write in the denominator of the fraction. And then the value without the decimal goes in the numerator. So for instance, if it's 0.26, you would just write 26 in the numerator. And then, of course, you could reduce that fraction if it's reducible, but either way, it would still be equivalent, whether you reduce or not, would still be equivalent to the original number. Okay, so question number 1 is a graphic representation of a percent. As you can see, you have grid boxes there that represent 100 total grid boxes. And of course, that makes good sense because, again, the word percent literally means per 100. So if we have something to comparison to 100, that's automatically then a percentage. So what we're doing here is we're counting the number of shaded grid boxes there. And each grid box set has a column or a row, either way you look at it, it's the same, consisting of 10. So in the A question there, you have 3 full rows here, or 3 full columns. Well, there's 10 each of those, so that's 30. And then 2 more there gets you to 32. So fractionally, this is 32 over 100. And of course, 32 over 100, as you know from getting grades on your papers and your tests and your essays, that would be a 32%. When it's out of 100, that's always the one we don't have to think too hard about, because that comparison to 100 is your percentage. In the B question there, we've got 3, again, shaded rows here, 10 each there, so that's 30. And then you've got down here a grid square that is 6 by 6, or in other words, 36 bit. So this is 36 and this is 30, and we put those together for 66 grid squares shaded. So that's 66 out of 100, or if you want that as a percent, that's 66% of your grid boxes covered. Question number 2 is asking us to write 28% as a fraction in simplest form. So, as you can see, what they've got down there in the lower right column is us doing the opposite of what we just did, writing out the grid boxes, shading it in, and then writing that as a fraction. And that'll work. As you saw in the notes there today, what you probably were going to do most often, the thing that will always work, is to change this to a decimal and then change the decimal into a fraction. To change 28% into a decimal, you would eliminate the percent sign. So the percentage sign is going to go away, and then move the decimal 2 times to the left. That's going to give you 0.28. Then what you're going to do is change that decimal into a fraction. Well, the bottom number in the fraction here is going to be 100. Why? Well, remember, the direction said to identify the place value of the last digit. 8 is in the hundredths place. So the bottom number of my fraction is going to be 100. And then the top is simply going to be this number without the decimal point, 28. And as you can see, that's exactly what we've written over here in the first step. Now, the reason that this one's actually pretty nice is because, as we've already talked about, this is just like your papers and your quizzes and your tests when they're out of 100 points. Although hopefully not this percentage, but we automatically know that, for instance, if I have 63%, that's 63 out of 100. If I get a 97%, that's 97 out of 100. All right, so when I have 28%, that's 28 out of 100. Obviously, when we go to larger percents, 972%, that's going to start to mess things up a little bit. All right, whereas this moving the decimal technique and getting rid of the percent sign, that's going to work all the time. All right, now the directions do say simplest form, however, so we do need to reduce that fraction. We can divide 4 out of both 28 and 100. The reason we're dividing 4 out is because 4 is the greatest common factor of 28 and 100. 28 divided by 4 is 7, and 100 divided by 4 is 25. So 28 100ths goes down to 7 25ths. 28% is 7 25ths. You can check that if you want. You're going to do 7 divided by 25 on the calculator, which would give you 0.28. And then when you change that to a percentage, well, you see that it is indeed 28%. Here's number 3. They're asking us to write 17% as a decimal. Again, this is very simple. They're doing some extra work here, actually, in changing it to a fraction. That's really an unnecessary step. As the directions said earlier, when we want to change a percentage into a decimal, all you really need to do is eliminate the percent sign and move the decimal 2 times to the left. So at 17%, I'm going to get rid of the percentage and move the decimal 2 times to the left. Remember, when there's no apparent decimal, meaning when we don't see a decimal in plain sight, we assume it's after the last digit that's represented. So it would be after the 7, 2 to the left makes this 0.17. Writing it as a fraction, even though it's nice, it's actually pretty unnecessary. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the check it out problem so we can conclude this presentation. In number 1, we're going to write the percent modeled by the grid. And again, the grid has 100 grid squares. Why? Because percent literally means per 100. It's a comparison to 100. So it only makes sense that there's 100 grid boxes here. So how many are shaded? Well, you have 7 full rows here. Remember, each row has 10 in it, so that's 70. And then this partially shaded row there has 5. So that's a total of 75. And we're comparing it to the total number of grid boxes, which is 100. So that's 75 over 100. And remember, once we write it over 100, this top number is automatically your percent. So that's 75%. If that doesn't work for you, or perhaps let's say it doesn't work out to be something right over 100, all right? Forget that the grid's there. Let's just say they gave you any old fraction. All right, you would divide the numerator divided by the denominator, which is something you probably do on a calculator. 75 divided by 100 is 0.75. And then you take the percent and go twice to the right and add the percent sign. 75%. Number 2, we're going to write 45% as a fraction in simplest form. So again, we're going to go through the intermediary steps here. We're going to change this into a decimal, which is a little bit different than what you see presented here. All right, you're going to eliminate the percent sign and take and move the decimal 2 times to the left, which is now going to give you 0.45. So now you're going to take the decimal, 0.45, and convert that into a fraction. Well, 5 is the last digit, and that's important because remember the place value of the last digit is what I'm going to write in the denominator. So since 5 is in the hundreds place, the bottom number of my fraction is 100. The top is this without the decimal. So I'm going to get rid of the point, and it's just going to be 45. Almost there now. Now it's just a matter of reducing, and what you see in the blue box there will work because it's saying to divide the numerator and the denominator by 5. And indeed, that is correct. 5 is the greatest common factor of 45 and 100, and of course that's how we reduce these guys. We always divide out the greatest common factor. So I divide 5 out of 45 and 100, and the result is 9/20. Finally, in number 3, they're asking us to write 67% as a decimal. Again, to go percent to a decimal is really simple. Eliminate the percent sign and then move the decimal twice to the left. So I make this go away and then go twice to the left with my percent or my decimal, and that's 0.67.